Hello, welcome to our very first episode. I'm here with Sean. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Mike, for having me. I'm Sean Leahy. I'm an independent advisor to defense tech startups and to investors who are getting interested in the defense technology space. And my background started out as a data scientist, places like DARPA, JIDO, the intelligence community. Ended up working for a couple of sort of medium-sized and larger contractors, and then decided to get in on my own, or with a partner actually, in a startup doing some work for the United States Army and their biometrics efforts. Have some interesting stories there about being on an OTA and trying to transfer to a larger program. Then I decided to kind of put on my dual use hat and went to a company called Sayari Labs, a fantastic risk intelligence data product, where they sold both to the DoD and federal organizations, but also commercial. And then from there, had a really cool opportunity to take a year to go to Capitol Hill. And I was a defense fellow in the United States Senate with Senator Steve Daines from Montana. And that came from a lot of hard-won experience, understanding how the defense acquisition kind of process is broken, and some of it can only really be fixed by changing the law. And so was happy to be part of a couple different efforts to move new innovation pathways forward so that these maybe non-traditional, smaller firms can have a clear path towards scaling within DoD. And right now, I think we're seeing a really cool moment between sort of technology entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley, other folks have been around for a while, and the DoD actually trying to onboard those folks and bring them on in a way they haven't really done in a couple of decades. So excited to talk today about everything that's wrong but improving with innovation in the DoD. Hopefully, I have something interesting to say.
No, that's actually incredibly fascinating. So something I want to touch on real quickly is, so you mentioned about getting involved with, changing the laws and being with that senator in Montana. What got you started in legal? And then what is maybe one or two things that you really got after to change in that period of time?
Yeah. So the genesis for me wanting to get into some legislation was in 2019, 2020. I was with a small company, and we won a competitive down select OTA with the Army to upgrade their biometrics collection system. So any prior service people out there who maybe have used the BAT or HIDE devices in the field, we were part of a program to try and upgrade that. And these were systems that were the size of a car battery. They were originally developed way back during Bosnia. They were used to collect fingerprints and face scans and irises from third-party nationals downrange, but they were cumbersome. The sort of data transfer was really manual. They had to burn CDs and fly them around different fobs and stuff. And their search and match kind of algorithms weren't quite up to par. So, the company I was with, we condensed all this down so it could run onto an Android device. And it was great. I got to spend 2 days out in Camp Bullis, Texas, working with soldiers on, fielding it and getting their feedback. Fast forward a little bit, we win this competitive down select, and we run into a couple of problems. The first one was COVID, which messed up everybody's schedule. But the second one was all of this acquisition and procurement kind of minutia that when you're a firm that's mostly engineers, you don't really have that in the front of your mind, right? So we ran into budget issues and contracting structure issues and IP protection issues, and also things like fielding and support, where they were asking us, hey, what's your plan to put FSRs out there in like places like Syria and Iraq? And we're like, well, we're 30 engineers who live in Northern Virginia. I my passport's still good, right? But we didn't have experience with that. And so it kind of fell apart. It didn't turn into what we thought it could have been in terms of scale. And through all that, I started to get familiar with things like PPB&E, the FAR, how OTAs work, the path from R&D dollars to procurement dollars, and realized a lot of this is really antiquated kind of legislation from the 70s that hasn't been updated. And so flash forward a couple of years later, I had this cool opportunity to be part of the Congressional Innovation Fellowship, where it takes technologists and puts them in the Hill for a year. And found my way there to the United States Senate with Senator Daines, and just try to be. I knew I wasn't going to create the best, most amazing like defense acquisition reform bill all on my lonesome. I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to support efforts that I already knew were out there from different offices and different committees. And so really it was just a matter of creating it as a new priority for the senator's office and putting some of our weight behind it, and then working with other offices to try and pass it mostly through the NDAA. There are a couple different things there that I worked on. One of them didn't make it. This was something called the Defense Entrepreneurial Innovation Act. It was originally introduced by Ken Calvert's team. This great kind of way to let the Undersecretary of Defense for R&E select promising programs, SIBRs, SITRs, AFWorks, things of that nature, and getting them put into the future years defense plan, right? So that gives multi-year money and sustainable spend to promising new technologies. And that's also a signal for investors that, a defense startup or smaller firm has gained traction in the market and has a future ahead of them. I didn't quite make it. There's the vagaries of how the committee process works and negotiations on what gets in and what doesn't get in. The 2023 or 2024 NDAA was one of the longest ones ever. It had over 1,000 amendments. So didn't quite get to the finish line, but was happy to be at least part of that effort, and some other related ones as well. That's one I wanted to highlight. There's still a lot of really great folks out there who are trying, and on the Hill, who are trying to change things in a really meaningful way. And I think that we're seeing that mature with programs like AppFit. There's also Raider, continued success of things like TACFi and StratFi to try and help transition really promising technologies, and also to have allocated budget behind them, right? That's really kind of the central point, is that there's a lot of good ideas that have kind of a lot of maybe moral support, where there's a lot of folks who say, and the department says they want them, they're good, but where the rubber meets the road is dollars on contract. And it's been really tricky for the past really 2 or maybe even 3 decades to have some assurance that there's going to be money in out years to help grow these smaller programs into something that's a little bit larger.
I think, that kind of gets where this conversation's meat and potatoes kind of leads to, right? Because you kind of painted a beautiful story of kind of this cataclysm event where we're at right now, where you're taking technology. We have a lot of vehicles for ingest, be that, SIBR, SITRs, OTAs, you kind of name it. We got these vehicles to get it in, but sustainment is kind of really the hardball to play. I can get you $1.25 million in 6 to 8 weeks through an open topics or a specific topics or a solicitation through DIU. And DIU just had a major increase in their O&M in this next NDAA, and they're kind of the bridging the gap kind of scenario. But when it comes to those out years, as you mentioned, to try to get sustainment dollars, DoD just isn't. They're just not budgeted that way, and it's a culture thing. And I think you touched right on it. We really have to change the laws and how the enterprise views those things, and how you accomplish that, I think, is how we're going to unlock a lot of it.
Yeah. One thing I like to put out there is there's no one bad entity or like bad actor in this. It's kind of cool right now to like hate on the primes or to like hate on like big program offices or whatever, big programs of record. A lot of that is just the way that the system has developed over time and the market's natural reaction to it. I mean, the PPB&E process itself, which is the planning, programming, budgeting, execution process, is how the DoD plans its programs, allocates budget, sends its budget request to Congress. It's a really convoluted process with overlapping timelines that are almost impossible, right? Like if you have an urgent need right now as like a COCOM or something, well, according to like strict rules of PPBE, you need to account for that 2 years ago. Well, it's not possible. Like you can't predict the future, right? But that's kind of how it's built. So this change that where everyone's looking for, it's not just like one thing or one switch to flip or like one new key piece of legislation. It's cultural, it's systemic. And so everyone's trying to, maybe not everyone, but like a lot of folks are trying to move this in the right direction, but finding that as soon as they change one part of the system, three other things they didn't quite anticipate come up as new issues. For like people with software development background, which is a little bit where I come from. This is like when you're tracking bugs and you're removing them. You fix one bug in one part of your program, three new bugs pop up that you didn't know were there before in another one, and so then you're just kind of going in a circle. I feel like to a certain extent that's kind of what's happening. Um, so it's not straightforward, and anybody who's talking about like really straightforward or like easy solutions is maybe painting too rosy of a picture.
Or a Sith Lord, sort
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah, or just, yeah. Those counterintelligence agents are everywhere. You can never be too careful.
No, so it touches on a topic I talk to people all the time, right? Because like you talked about the buildup of this corporate structure in defense, and usually I kind of walk people through. If you look at kind of where the explosion was for innovation, we're talking World War,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is where probably the bed of innovation was
Yeah,
born, right? Uh, Defense and the government stood up these go GoCos or Kojos. There you go,
yeah.
Kojos.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of where all this began, right? You had corporate ran, government owned facilities, and we were sitting there producing planes like crazy. And then we did that, planes, boats, whatever you name it, for 20, 30 years. And then we had the Great Depression and all these things that kind of led to post World War II. We started kind of de-risking everything.
Mm-hmm.
We started selling off assets, relying more on cocos. That's kind of when the primes kind of got their foothold, and then we started to make this segue into what we have the corporate structure now. Right, we went into Vietnam. We had to up investing, but from Vietnam to 91, we built this structure, and then Desert Storm reinforced that we did good things with that corporate structure. And then we've been in that cycle for about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're entering a potential, GPC or great power competition. And now last second, we're like, oh, this system that we created as a dominant nation is no longer going to keep up with what we need,
Yeah.
because the pacing threat is, especially when we talk about onboarding and sustainment in those out years, is China and other countries have the luxury of not caring about their people. So
Mm-hmm.
you invent something, it's now mine, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to pay for it. I can Amazon you, I can Microsoft you, and you can't do anything about it. But we care about our people. But making that fit inside that corporate structure that we've kind of niched is extremely incredibly hard. What accessions would you have to potentially begin to solve that, outside of what you've done already?
That's a big question, right? I'm not sure if I have the complete answer on how to reinvigorate the defense industrial base here. I think that it's problems of scale, right? This is something that both Silicon Valley and actually the Pentagon have in common is when things get to a really really big scale, they get fundamentally more difficult to manage or just different in management than on when they're smaller. For a great power competition, a lot of this turns into a sustainment. You've said it a couple times now. What happens when we lose large scale weapon systems, potentially in the Pacific, right? Very far away from home. If we're losing potentially carrier group or, other big pieces of hardware, what's the delta? What's the time delta to replacing those? And we have economized the capacity of the defense industrial base over decades of not having great power competition to the point now where it's a little uncertain if we could replace and sustain it kind of at this scale that theoretically we'd need to in a competition against the PLA. Um, And so it requires more upfront investment. I mean, I'm not the first one to touch on this by any means. You can see some really good writing from people like Pete Modigliani on, and also a variety of folks at CSIS, on the defense budget needs to be bigger, right? It's kind of hard to say that when we're getting to close towards $900 billion annually, but in real terms, it's actually almost a decrease year over year, stretching back several. And especially in the procurement realm, right? Like the R&D dollars keep going up. They're now almost at parity with procurement dollars and procurement O&M dollars, and that's never happened before, right? It means we're paying for these new cool science projects, which is good to an extent, but we're not then buying them at scale, right? And we're also not buying the infrastructure you need to produce at scale. So the top line message I would have for Congress, as a voter, is defense budget does need to go up, but it needs to be going up targeted towards procurement and scaling and production. You can look at something like the Replicator Initiative, which is about large scale, rapidly attritable assets. So think drones, all the other unmanned assets. The idea there is to have thousands or more of these, so that if we lose a couple, there's a lot more to go. But the production and sustain costs, I'm not sure if we really have the allocation right now in budget towards being able to build the machine that builds the machines. So that's my 1 point top level for how to do this is throw more money at it, but throw more money, I think, in a targeted, well assessed way.
Yeah, no, I agree. You can't just add money to the corporate structure because the corporate structure is going to do what the corporate structure does. You have
Yeah.
to be intentional,
Mm-hmm.
and purposeful with that kind of funding allocation. And I don't know if we've kind of baked that in because you touch on some colors of money, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how the entire government works, right? Procurement in the Air Force, that's $30-$80 other, or 30, name your series if it's an aircraft or a different vessel.
Right.
And then you got O&M and RT&E, and you have all these other colors, and they're kind of distributed. Now you can do conversions about 25% either way, and there's a game inside the system. But
Yes.
the moment you put it into the NDAA saying this is how this money is, this is where it's going, this is the concept for it, it locks that corporate structure into it. So if we're purposeful and we get good verbiage in there, a lot of good positive things can happen. But until that happens, we're going to be sunk. And if we keep going through having to do continual resolutions,
Yeah.
it's just going to shoot us in the foot, because a lot of DoD still hasn't got their initial release of funds, even
Mm-hmm.
though we were signed all the way out through the rest of the year.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing you can point to, I think, with pretty much unqualified anger, is the CR, and unending CRs and non-regular budget processes, which have been going on for over 20 years at this point. It's a national security issue, and I think, in my opinion, and in other people's thinking as well, because it creates so much uncertainty for the department, for contractors, for programs, all across the board, right? Going back a little bit, though, another thing about being intentional with these colors of money, and maybe looking more towards procurement O&M dollars, that's actually a really good signal to industry as well. I think one of the things out there right now in the mind of a lot of folks is the R&D dollars aren't actually what's attracting, or it's not attracting as much as maybe the department thinks, some of this new technology. Because people who understand this system understand that doesn't get to scale, that doesn't get to fielding and operation of whatever they're selling. It gets to nice R&D cycles. That's fine. We're going to learn some cool stuff. But actually getting it in the hands of warfighters requires that next step. And so I think that if you have procurement dollars go up, you're going to see more new technology come into the department from outsiders, totally outside funded. There are VCs and other investors out there who want to fund interesting deep tech. But they're looking for ultimately a buyer at scale to then purchase it. We don't need, a Cyber Phase 1 now is like $200,000 at the most, or $180,000. Like that, forget that. That's a pre-seed raise in a lot of cases. What we need is a 10 million, 20 million, $50 million procurement contract that's kind of at the end of that tunnel. Sure, the technology has to be validated and verified, has to go through testing. I don't want to short circuit any of that, but there has to be this kind of golden ticket at the end to act as an incentive structure, not these little drips and drabs, along the way. So there's these second order effects that you can trigger with something like, boosting procurement budgets.
Yeah, I think we're telling a conflicting story as yeah, in the NDA though, because I don't know if you saw some of the verbiage in there, but they're trying to include everything as a service, which
Mm-hmm.
now you're shifting from procurement dollars, and that's more O&M and maybe RT&E money, which is kind of an interesting thing, and maybe that's what everything as a service is trying to unlock. Is hey, you can kind of throw whatever color of money at it. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but yeah, no, I think that you're dead on, right? It's increasing those dollars because they're just from industry standpoint, you're looking at how much capital there is if you're doing a market analysis,
Mm-hmm.
how many free dollars are there? Where do they hide? What is this? And when you see, oh, R&D dollars are nearly half of the defense budget, it's okay. So really I got 400 billion to play with, and then okay, now I got all these mandated programs,
Mm-hmm.
delete those, and that what's rest,
Yeah.
and then what's their mission set,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really what you're looking at, especially these VCs that are given money to dual capability or defense um, things. That's the number they're looking at.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not looking at R&D nearly as much.
No, I mean, when I'm talking with both investors and startups, is that like R&D funds? You look at that as non-dilutive capital, right? That you can use that to continue to iterate on your product, right, and to iterate on your product based on customer requirements. Customer requirements in this case being program offices, warfighters, right? Um, and you can use it as a way to basically fund yourself while you're going out and doing the harder work of actually talking to people who would be the end user of whatever you're building. The concept I like to talk about is capability mission fit. This is kind of the DoD version of product market fit. Product market fit being ubiquitous in Silicon Valley, but capability mission fit is whatever you're building. What mission set does that fit into, right? And that's not necessarily obvious, right? So like maybe you're building a cyber tool, and so you're thinking like, I'm going to go to cybercom. Maybe not, right? There are other places, believe it or not, there's redundancy in the DoD. I know, shocker, right? But there are other places that have cyber mission sets, and maybe whatever you're building is a better fit for them. So it takes some time and some relationship building to go out and find those end users who are going to actually be hands on with your product and figuring out what they really need to be successful with their mission. And taking 2 years of your own capital or investor capital to do that can be kind of risky. You can use R&D dollars responsibly, right? Where you're also executing on that R&D agreement you've made to start to build those relationships and to try and move towards, a different color of money. But it's a long process, right? This is the other thing I say is like this is the powerlifting of business. This is a big market, but this is a very complex market. It's a very unforgiving market. And one of the first questions I ask startups I work with is like, are you really prepared to kind of commit to this for really 2 years at a minimum before maybe getting any traction? Because that's the real reality of working with the DoD. It's getting better. I want to say that too, is that with some of these programs we've talked about, it's getting better, but it's still not. Oh yeah, 6 months to traction, and we're signing contracts left and right. It's just not going to be that way. You have to commit to it up front.
Yeah, I think you kind of highlighted kind of the value proposition of consulting agencies all over the nation, right? It's kind of like, don't worry, I'm gonna hold your hand. I've been hit before, right? I've been hit in the face so many times. You don't have to do it. I got you, right? I mean, because it's so painful, right? And once you build those relationships, you know where it needs to go. Somebody can come to you and say, "Hey, I have this product. Where does it fit? All right, let's figure it out, and we're gonna go through this together. And I'll take the blows, and you get the wins."
Yeah.
Because that's just how complicated it is. As you mentioned, right? Oh, I'll go to cyber. Okay, but which branch, right?
Yeah.
There's no cyber force yet, and they each have their own enclaves, because in
Mm-hmm.
the DoDI, an AO can be at any level and any mission set, and they each, division or matchcom or
Yeah.
otherwise has their own cyber team, and they have their own RMF. So what kind of tool are you making, and it's just this whole, breakdown of when you're trying to find a customer, and ultimately it comes down to, unfortunately and fortunately, depending how you look at who uh, so.
Yeah, it a lot of business is relationships, but here's the thing: is that you're working with people who are mission motivated, right? That's a really rewarding part of this experience. Is that a lot of folks have pretty high bullshit detectors in this industry because there's a real mission, on the other end of this thing. So you can have really rewarding experiences, like the one I point to in my own personal experiences. When I got to go out to Camp Bullis and do 2 days of testing in the field with you know 20 to 24-year old like 11 Bravos and stuff, where we were just out there in the desert running around with Android phones doing biometric collection, exercises. And it was so cool to have these guys and gals say like, yeah, this is really useful, and I feel like I know how to use this intuitively, and I feel like if I had this with me, downrange, I would be confident using it, and it'd be easy for me to get it, get it done. That's really, that's what's rewarding in this business, right? I mean, there's a financial aspect as well, but ultimately we're after mission here. You also said something, you rattled off a couple of acronyms there, which which we're tracking here, but like there's a culture element too, where the DoD says we want technology from outside traditional contractors. We want to go to Silicon Valley or Austin or wherever to get it, and that's good. But then you start to yeah, the rubber meets the road, and people start to hear things like MagCom and CoCom and like the two shop, three shop, and there's like kind of a almost like learning a second language, which
Mhm.
I have to do sometimes with some of the folks I work with, where you have to follow kind of the organizational thinking of the military as well, and that's just so you can communicate with your customers. Because if you're not able to do that, literally speak their language, there's going to be a breakdown in requirements and trust and whatnot. So it's a little thing, but it's a little thing that keeps popping up where the acronym soup and other kind of lingo that folks who've been around for a while kind of take for granted um, can be kind of a initial stumbling block for folks who've never been involved with defense tech before.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I I should put a book together of just the acronyms. It's like acronym guide for industry. Because I mean, it's awful. Something I always love to point out to people is one I really enjoy. It's an AVAL. So the AVAL is a LAU 142 on the F-22 Raptor, and it's a pneumatic rack. Well, it kicks out an AIM 120, and well, AVAL stands for AMRAM Vertical Ejection Launcher, which, as you've already picked up, is acronym inside of an acronym.
Yeah, it's nested.
uh, I love it so much. But yeah, that's where a lot, knowing people in the industry and getting those people in there, and fortunately, that has opened up a good funnel for a lot of veteran hires
Yeah.
into business, which it's almost like we've created this convoluted process that almost benefits also making sure there's veterans not on the side of the street. And it's kind of an interesting value proposition. But I mean, needless to say, it needs to be unwoven a little bit. So that way we can do this whole, kind of spread. Cause something I talk about in a book I just published, I call it default laziness. So one of the major issues is what the government and DoD don't do well is actually doing portfolio investment, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you're a company, you're going to invest your dollars in a diverse way to minimize impact when something bad happens. So if you lose vendor X, you lose this capability, you have redundancies built in. I'm not saying all companies do that. Some are just kind of, playing it hot and fast, which is fine. But, a good large company in similar size to DoD is going to have a significant portfolio diverse investment, and we don't do that in government at all. So government has a tendency to say, I just want one of this, one of that, one of this, because it's contract simplicity, and then perceptual buying power. So kind of unweaving on that whole world to open up that scope for diversification. That's why they're focusing on these Silicon Valley and these other companies, is to unlock that. So that way, if I have this new missile or new munition or new asset, oh, well, company one has a production timeline of 3 months. Let me go with company B because they can give it to me in 3 days now because I've maxed out that production line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what, securing national defense is at the core about.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to just kind of capacity improvement in the defense industrial base as well. A lot of it gets down though to some pretty nitty gritty contracting issues. I know that Eric Lofgren, who wrote Acquisition Talk, the blog, best acquisition blog of all time. I'll say it. That's my hot take, except it's not a hot take. Everyone agrees. Eric's a great guy. He was, I think, one of the folks talking about a portfolio versus program approach, similar to what you just outlined. I don't want to totally speak for Eric here, but very similar to what you're talking about, where instead of getting really tightly bound to individual programs that are individual line items that go to Congress every year that get reviewed, going to more of that holistic portfolio approach that's oriented towards being able to execute whatever mission you're responsible for. Um, I don't know necessarily like the details of like a cost analysis on that, but my assumption would be, or my suspicion would be, it goes to just increasing the defense budget pretty significantly as well, right? So again, kind of going back to what I led off with, you change one thing, it's an improvement in its own little box, but then it has some downstream impacts that might make things complicated again. The portfolio approach is something that I've kept an eye on. I think it's well formulated, and I'd like to see some experimentation with it, but that would require passing the NDA on time.
Oh, I mean, it would, and it would inspire competition as well, which I think is probably the best thing when it comes to buying power, because what the corporate structure and the government sees as buying power is we can just buy 10 billion of one thing, but that's not real buying power. Buying power is to pay two companies right across the street from each other for the same thing, and whoever's the victor gets a little bit more off the top, right? And that's when we talk about inspiring innovation. That's how you inspire a boxing match, right? Because even in commercial industry, innovation kind of slows down once somebody swoops in and buys all the trademarks
Mm-hmm.
and buys all the rights and is the only guy on the block. And then now you have a product that's 700 times the price, but it isn't innovating. Like no one's benefiting from that except a couple key individuals on the board of directors, maybe.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's you hit the nail on the head in that the government should be a monopsony, right? They should be this buying exclusivity, and they should be able to leverage that for a good optimization of both performance and cost. And they haven't done that. I mean, government programs have this horrible cost disease. They balloon, they miss deadlines, right? And that lack of competitiveness is definitely one of those problems. I've seen OTAs, been on an OTA that was effective because it was competitive. I mean, that Camp Bull story I've talked about now a couple of times. There was another vendor down there right the week after us or something, and they put their product out there in the field too, right? It was a competitive endeavor that we came out on top with, but it wasn't something where we had baked together from like the pre-RFI process to the pre-RFP to RFP kind of a solicitation that was wired for us, which is the bread and butter of the industry right now. And that's not knocking any individual firms or whatever, but part of what you do when you're trying to do business development is get into that process early so that the solicitation is written pretty much with your firm in mind, right? If we were working towards a more direct, competitive, test-driven scenario, it would change that, right? And that's not necessarily should be the blanket case for every single military procurement. I'm not saying that, but there's definitely room to have it be a lot more of like, hey, everybody show up, at this test site with your stuff. We're going to run it head to head, and then we'll do our performance analysis and talk about cost and see who's coming out on top. But right now it's a paperwork drill. Like right now it's working a system to get almost a predetermined outcome in a lot of cases. And it's not necessarily resulting in performance and cost effectiveness to the end customer, the people paying for it, which is the government and therefore the taxpayer. And it's not necessarily resulting in good performance to the people who's using it, which is the warfighter. So yeah, system's not great. No one's. I don't think you're gonna have a guest on your show, Mike, that's like defense acquisition's never been better. Like it's the perfect system. We nailed it with Robert McNamara in the '70s. Like no, I just it's not performing the way that we need it to. But the good news is, I'm an eternal optimist. There's a lot of really smart and talented people right now pushing in the same direction to try and change it.
Oh yeah, yeah, and industry's helping out significantly. I kind of love this quote from so I always forget his name, but he works for Rebellion Defense, and he was one of the founders. He was the lead hacker in DoD for some time, and he got out and started this company. And I was in DC at a S&T modernization summit uh, led by an NDA, I believe. Either way, but he had said something about how he runs his business, and he's like, "I'm just going to produce capabilities I know DoD needs, and if they buy it, they don't."
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, that kind of like maverick energy is what's helping defense. Is we see a capability gap, we're going to build it, and we're going to take some risk, and we're going to get it to
Oh
you.
yeah. Oh yeah, one of my favorite stories is and one of Andrew Will's first product. I'm not sure I got my details right on this. If I flub any details, sorry, but their Sentry Tower, right? They just built it, right? They didn't try and get R&D up front or like suggest the idea. Like they just built the thing, and then called. I think it was actually DHS first. Again, sorry about details, and we're like, hey, come check this out, right? And there was and boom, capability mission fit, and that kind of started this flywheel. And Andrew is dropping new products really, really consistently and much quicker than a lot of more traditional folks, and they're taking risk on it, right? Which is good. Now they have some kind of structural advantages that smaller firms can't benefit from, right? And they have a lot of really great industry experience leading them, which again is just not ubiquitous, right? The whole thing we're talking about here is folks who have no DoD experience. How do we get them and some of their talents to support the DoD mission? But yeah, that mavericky idea of just we're going to build the thing and then go show up with it. That's a paradigm breaker, right? Because the entire way that the DoD process is set up is like come up with an idea, maybe start with a SIBR, maybe go to DARPA, maybe go to one of the labs. Okay, we build for a couple of years, and now we're looking for a transition partner, and it doesn't quite work, and there's the valley of death. And it's just this, again, it's a broken system that the way the system's written down on paper is not how it works, in the real world. So you can either continue to try and prosecute that system, which everyone's going to have to do to a certain extent, right? You can't just completely abandon it. But taking these sort of tactical risks to circumvent it or to try and short circuit it, maybe is a better way to say it, is something that's really cool to see over the past, I'd say, 5 years or a little bit longer. And that hasn't happened since before I was born, probably.
Yeah, I mean, the only use case that the system actually makes sense now is I saw some contracts signed to 3D print on the moon. Okay. It's like, all right.
If we're thinking that far ahead, like, yeah, maybe we're back in the saddle again for sure.
RFIs and RFQs make sense. Yeah. All right. But for simple things, and not saying they're simple, but air, land, and sea power is nothing new. It's hundreds of years old at this point, and ground power is, multi-millennia old. So it's not unable to come up with these in your garage or in something and just say, hey, I made this thing. Do you want to buy it? Yes or no? Space is the only one where it makes sense. But with that being said, this is a topic we could probably go in circles all day. Uh, to kind of wrap it up, when we talk about innovation, what's the one thing that you always kind of point out when you're working with somebody, or when you were working with, what's the one thing when it comes to innovation internally or trying to get in defense that you kind of like fixate on, that kind of gets you through to the next day?
Um, really, just having faith that you believe you can impact a mission in a meaningful way, and that even if the road to get there is unclear, if you have that commitment, you're going to find a way, right? If you are focusing on the problems of today and trying to figure out, well, if I solve this or that with whatever I'm building, well, then maybe I've solved everything and it'll just be smooth sailing. It's not. There's always going to be a new problem. There's always going to be a new challenge. So you just have to focus on, what's my end goal here, right? My end goal is to, help a warfighter in the field, be safer, stay in communication, whatever it might be. If you can fix on that, you can navigate all the problems that will inevitably keep happening to you, right? It's a commitment thing, but you can't just commit to, I'm going to work hard, forever without any positive feedback. Like, we're all humans, we need that. So you have to commit to the mission. And that's what I tell, the folks that I work with is, figure out really what you want to do if you're getting into defense technology. And if you can really fix in your mind a clear, simple mission, right? The more specific, the better. And you kind of write that into your brain, you'll progress. If you're not sure what you're doing here, if you're wandering around trying to figure out how many sides the Pentagon has, you might find yourself running away pretty fast. So commitment up front to the mission.
Yeah, no, I think that's it, and I think that kind of rings true in any business. You got to put your stake in the ground where you want to be, where your goal is, uh, and run for it.
Yeah.
But no, so I thank you for your time. I hope to see you again, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed the public venting session about defense innovation. So,
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
oh yeah, absolutely.